Now, let's simplify all these steps into a practical three-step framework that you can apply to any situation where disruptions are possible. So step one, identify the sources of potential disruptions. Assessing vulnerability is the first step in risk management. You need to systematically examine your operations and ask, where are we vulnerable? What could go wrong? What dependencies do we have that could fail? For example, if you're a manufacturer, you might identify vulnerabilities in your supply network, your logistics provider, your production facilities, your workforce availability, or your technology systems. Each of these represents a potential source of disruption. Step two, assess the potential impact of the risk. Here the goal is to quantify both the probability and the potential impact of the risk. So we're not just asking, could this happen, but how likely is it, and how bad would it be if it did? This quantification is crucial because it enables prioritization. A high probability, high impact risk demands immediate attention. A low probability, low impact risk might be accepted without further action. Without this assessment, we're just guessing at priorities. Step three, develop plans to mitigate the risk. Strategy for minimizing the impact of the risk could take many different forms, depending on the nature of the problem. This is where we get creative and practical about solutions. For example, for supplier vulnerability, mitigation might mean qualifying backup suppliers. For facility risk, it might mean geographic diversification. For workforce risk, it might mean cross-training employees. The key is matching the mitigation strategy to the specific nature of the risk. So, if we get specific about mitigation strategies, you can see here a table mapping different types of supply chain disruptions to appropriate mitigation approaches. This is a practical reference that illustrates how different risks call for different responses. For natural disasters, like climate change impacts or severe weather, appropriate strategies include contingency planning with alternate sites and insurance coverage. You can't prevent a hurricane, but you can have backup facilities and financial protection. Country risks arising from political or economic instability can be addressed through currency hedging and local production or sourcing. If you manufacture in a country with volatile currency, hedging protects you from exchange rate swings, for example. Supplier failures are mitigated by maintaining multiple suppliers. Never become completely dependent on a single source for critical inputs. The COVID-19 pandemic taught many companies this lesson the hard way. Network provider failures require support of redundant digital networks. If your business depends on internet connectivity, have backup providers and failover systems. Regulatory risks involving licensing and compliance issues demand upfront and continuing research, good legal advice, and robust compliance program. So ignorance of regulations is never an acceptable excuse. Commodity price risks can be managed through multi-sourcing and commodity hedging. If your business, for example, is sensitive to oil prices or metal prices, financial hedging instruments can provide stability in this case. Logistics failures call for safety stock, detailed tracking systems, and alternate suppliers who can step in if your primary logistic provider fails. Inventory risks are addressed by pooling inventory across locations and maintaining safety stock levels calculated based on demand, variability, and lead times. Major quality failures require careful selection and ongoing monitoring of suppliers. Prevention through rigorous qualification processes is far better than dealing with quality problems later. Loss of customers is mitigated through continuous service and product innovation. The best defense against customer attrition is giving them compelling reason to stay with you. And theft and vandalism require insurance, security precautions, knowledge of likely risks, and intellectual property protection through patents and trade secrets. Now, let's look at a powerful tool for connecting risks to strategic decisions, which is called risk mapping. So risk mapping involves assessment of the probability or relative frequency of an event against the aggregate severity of the loss. It's a way of visualizing how different risks intersect with different business strategies. So this matrix you can see now maps various risk types across the top. You can see natural disasters, country risks, supplier failure, and so on, against different operational strategies down the left side. So outsourcing, sole sourcing, lean practices, and distribution hubs. So the colors indicate impact level, red for high impact, orange for moderate impact, and green for no significant impact. Look at the pattern that emerges here. Outsourcing shows high impact from supplier failure and logistics failure, which makes sense because when you outsource, you're dependent on external parties. If they fail, you have a problem. Sole sourcing, which is relying on a single supplier, shows high impact across almost every category. This should give any risk management, pause. While sole sourcing might offer cost advantages, it creates enormous risks. Lean practices, like just-in-time inventory, shows high impact from supplier failure, logistics failure, and inventory risk. Lean systems are efficient but fragile. They have little buffer when disruption occurs. Distribution hubs shows high impact from natural disasters because concentrating inventory in hub locations create geographic vulnerability. This kind of mapping helps organizations make informed strategic choices. If you choose lean practices, you need to invest heavily in supply chain visibility and supplier relationship management to compensate for the inherent vulnerability. Now let's look at how organizations actually document and track risks. The risk inventory or risk register. On your screen you see a detailed spreadsheet that captures the essential information about each identified risk. So starting from the left, we have risk number and risk name or short name for identification and reference. Then we have risk description, which provides a detailed explanation of what the risk actually is. Then we have existing risk control measures in place. So this column is used to document what we're already doing to manage this risk. This is important because we're not starting from zero. We need to understand our current state before deciding on additional action. Then we have the outcome column, which describes what would happen if the risk materialized despite our controls. This feeds into our impact assessment. Then we have our assessment columns. So impact and likelihood, each scored on a scale, typically 1 to 5. And these generate an impact score and likelihood score, which multiply together to produce the net score or overall risk rating. For example, we have an example here with access to high hazard areas. So the risk is unauthorized access to hazardous areas outside normal business hours. Existing controls include mechanical locks and random spot checks by police. The outcome: note that some buildings are open to the public, increasing unauthorized access chances, and that random spot checks aren't sufficient given the life safety implications. Impact is rated serious with a score of 4. Likelihood is rated likely with a score of 3, which gives us a net score of 12, which means that this is a significant risk that requires attention. Now the remaining columns document our response to that risk. So risk mitigation actions describes what we're going to do. In this case, installing electronic door locks with proxy cards. And then responsibility. The column responsibility assigns ownership. Specific employee, John Doe in this case. And then the cost estimate quantifies the investment needed, so $3,000 for this example. And resources needed identifies what's required. And finally, target date for completion sets a deadline. And mitigation complete tracks whether we actually finished and met the required date. So this kind of systematic documentation transforms risk management from the abstract discussion we've been having so far into concrete action and accountability.